Greetings and welcome to our leadership webinar, How to Use Emotions to Boost Innovation. And I am very pleased to have with us today Dr. Fabian Bernhard, who is a professor in EDHEC Executive Education's Global MBA. Fabian teaches leading people in organizations as a core leadership and management course in the Global MBA, and he also teaches electives, building resilience this year and leading remotely last year. The Global MBA, as you know, is an executive education program of the EDHEC Business School. Fabian Bernhard is a professor in our Department of Management at EDHEC Business School, and he's also a professor in the Family Business Center. And his research focuses around family business, also around emotions and psychology and leadership. And so we're really looking forward to having your insight in terms of using emotions to boost innovation. This webinar will be recorded and available to you on demand after the session, but right now we're live, so very excited about that. And that gives you the opportunity to ask questions directly to Professor Bernhard. And to do that, you should be using the question box, which you'll see at the bottom right of your screen. Just click that open and you should be able to type in questions. I'll be looking at the questions during the presentation. We'll save much time for your questions at the end, but feel free to enter your questions as we go along and we'll get to them at the right time during the session. You may have Professor Bernhard ask you for some reactions or ask you some questions. So I'm also going to point out the react button, which is sort of in the middle bottom of your screen. And you'll see that there you have a chance to show some emoji emotions. And that seems quite appropriate for the topic of the day. So without further ado, and with many thanks, I'd like to turn it over to you, Fabian. See, someone's already got their reactions coming in. I'll turn it over to you, Fabian, for a deep dive into how to use emotions to boost innovation. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Sandra. So, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames, messieurs, welcome to this session. And I am very happy to be here with you today and tell you a bit about what I do when I don't teach. Because we professors, we have sometimes a class to teach. And on the other side, we also do this topic of knowledge creation, which means, in other words, research. And since we spend most of our time on research, or at least I do, it can be very, lonely. So I'm very eager to share and go out and share my research results with people like you. And therefore, I'm very glad that I have you here now. Good. So in today's session, I will talk about one of my favorite topics. One of my topics that's really dear to my heart are emotions. And this is, if you know me, or if you know a bit about the background, and if you had read the bio that was online, you might have noticed that my actually not that much in psychology originally. I am from the finance field. I worked a couple of years at Wall Street in New York, and during that time, I was primarily in mergers and acquisitions. And when you think about emotions and finance, I think these are totally two different worlds. Most people have the image of banking and finance professions that these people want to stay far, far away from any emotions. I mean, you want to make rational decisions. You don't want to be influenced like by emotions. They are a disturbing factor for many people in the industry. But if you really think about it, are we really so rational as we think we are? Economic researchers have this term called Homo economicus. Maybe you've heard of that. If you have taken ever one of my class, I talk a bit about economicus. And the Homo economicus is homo, meaning the human, economicus, rational economic person, is the idea that a person makes decision based on rationality. And any emotions disturbs rationality. That's a view that we often see in terms of emotions in the business world. But anybody who has gained some experience in the field, so if you're not in initial stages of your studies, but you have had some work experience, people regularly realize that we are not like little robots. We have our own visions, our beliefs, our goals, our inner drives, our motivations. And with it comes a whole bunch of emotions that drive our inner life and change our behavior. So this idea of Homo economicus is a nice simplification for business models. But in the real life, anybody who has led a team, who has managed a team, knows that emotions are always in the game, that we cannot behave without them. Our motivation is driven by emotions, and that they are influencing us in many, many different ways. And even if you think of finance, like look at this little comic strip of finance you see in the upper left corner. The guy says, I've got a stock here that could really excel. Really excel, sell. And on the right side, you see people are going crazy. And that's what you see at the stock market sometimes. Emotions sometimes prevail. Look in the lower part. Sell. Oh, this is madness. I can't take it anymore. Goodbye. Bye. And people go crazy again. So the financial markets, even though they like the image of being pure rationally driven maximizers, profit maximization or utility maximization are most economic models, the maxim. But reality tells us that even in the financial profession, emotions are omnipresent, meaning they are all around. And if you have invested in stocks, or if you are considering cryptocurrency, Bitcoin was a big hype, that is very much driven by emotions. People become greedy, and suddenly some Elon Musk makes a funky comment and people get scared. Some people get confident, overconfidence. And these are all emotions, fear or feeling of being overly confident. And these are emotions that drive our business decisions, our financial decisions, and so on. But even if you're not interested in finance, maybe you come from the idea of, you work in the field where marketing plays a big role. Marketing is driven by the idea of manipulating our emotions that we can change people's behavior. Look at this fine gentleman in this illustration. Free lunch. Yeah, great, free lunch. Just put your $10 in here and you get your free lunch. This is another example where people easily want to play with our emotions in order to manipulate us, to lead us, to guide us, to influence us. And emotions are a good way how to influence people. Marketing people know a lot about it, and there's a lot of marketing psychology going on. In this picture here that I want to show you, that's a picture I took in a French museum. And if you are from Western Europe and connected with a background from Western Europe, I'm sure many of you will recognize the scene. I know that maybe people from Asia, people from other countries or other areas of the world might not be too familiar with the story. But what you see here in this painting is a story based on the adventures of an old Greek hero. Maybe you know this person. If you speak ancient Greek, you would say Ulysses. If you speak Latin, you would say Odysseus. In any case, he is an ancient Greek hero, war hero. Maybe you remember the movie Troy with Brad Pitt, in which, or the story of the wooden horse bringing into the city of Troy, in which some warriors were hidden. These were the ideas of Odysseus. And many of ideas in Western Europe based on Greek mythology. And one aspect is the writings of Homer, and he wrote a lot about the Odyssey, the stories of the adventures of this gentleman, the Greek ancient hero Odysseus. And in this painting, I think something is illustrated. Odysseus is facing some temptations. The temptations are the so-called sirens. You can think of sirens like wonderful creatures who want to influence sailors to come to them, and they have an evil mindset because as soon as the sailors come to them, the boat hits the rocks and many of them die, and the sirens try to seduce the sailors by singing beautiful songs to them. This is one of these stories. And Odysseus was a great war hero, a very smart gentleman. And if you think of what he has done, it is quite remarkable. And this scene deals with the story about Odysseus and the sirens. The sirens, again, are these beautiful mermaids that sing beautiful songs. You can think of sirens in kind of an influence, like an emotion that wants to drag you to a certain decision. And in this story, as it's depicted here right now, Odysseus faces the situation that he and his men are going through a passage in the Mediterranean Sea where the sirens are present. What happened is, Odysseus knew about what happened he heard about the story of the sirens, and he prepared for that. He put beeswax in the ears of his men, so the man couldn't hear anything anymore, and he himself, as you see right now in the picture of the ship, he was bound to the mast of the ship, that he couldn't move anymore. And prepared like this, he overcame the challenge. He overcame the challenge of the sirens trying to seduce him to hit the rocks in front of the boat. I think this is a very wonderful story to explain the emotions. Many people see emotions like a disturbance in their decision making, disturbance in the way how they make business decisions, and how they may eventually try to provide good leadership to make their business successful. But sirens could be a decision. It could be distraction, yes. But Odysseus is a great hero by preparing himself and his men to overcome these disturbances. I think many people say, well, this is due to Odysseus' superior intelligence. I would say certainly he's an intelligent person. But what I admire about Odysseus and this story, what it tells me about emotions, is that Odysseus is for me a hero because he does one thing different from many other big adventurers. Odysseus has a realization. He has a realization that he's only a human being, and as a human being, he will have weaknesses. Of course, he can learn about these sirens and say, well, if the sirens are there in the water, I will just ignore them because I know that they're evil. This would be not the optimal solution for him, because when you're in the situation, emotions will influence you. And Odysseus has, for me, the qualities of a big hero, because he realizes, well, even when I'm in the situation, I cannot behave properly in the way that I had to plan it. I will be influenced by these sirens, by these emotions. And for that, I need to prepare. So the realization of understanding yourself in a situation that can be easily emotional at the stock market or in a team situation where emotions boil up, you will not be able to stick to your initial plan. So better prepare for that. And one way how to prepare for that is what I usually in my classes try to stress is the ability to build up emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence can help leaders to make better decisions and to be more effective in their leadership. What is emotional intelligence? There are 4 factors usually attributed to an emotionally intelligent person. Number 1 is understanding your own inner life. your own emotionality, understanding yourself. Just as I've mentioned with Odysseus. Odysseus knows what's going on with him when he is in a certain situation. And an emotional, intelligent person knows about him or herself, about his or her own beliefs, dreams, values, and emotionality. Meaning this person knows exactly what presses the buttons. When the boss says something negative or a client is insulting, they know about what pushes their own buttons to become angry. So that would be number one perspective, understanding yourself. Number two is managing also your own emotions, not only understanding them, but also managing. So when your boss, your employee, your staff member, or your client pushes the button that makes you angry, you know how to manage your own emotionality, not to go crazy. A third aspect is of an emotionally intelligent person is also to understand other people's emotions. If you understand other people's emotions in a negotiation, when you see that the other person suddenly experiences fear or feels overconfidence, this gives you a big advantage. And the fourth dimension of an emotionally intelligent person is what most of people consider as emotionally intelligent is using emotions to influence other people. In the end, using emotions to lead other people. So this would be an emotionally intelligent person. Having said this, I would like you to use the next 15 minutes to tell you a little bit about my research into emotions, because I find it such a fascinating topic. So again, we are talking about emotions and emotional intelligence, self-awareness, meaning understanding yourself, managing yourself. Social awareness is understanding other people's emotionality around it and influencing that. That's the fourth dimension usually described as relationship management. In this seminar, I want you to think about your own emotionality, and that in the context of innovativeness. This seminar today, or this session, this webinar, had the title, How to Use Emotions to Make You More Innovative or Creative. So my question is, which emotions make you innovative? Think about it for a moment. Think about when the last time you had a really cool idea, a really an innovative idea, where you came up with a new idea, a new process, something to do different. How did you feel? And I mean, don't think about how you felt once you achieved it. Well, we all feel great afterwards. But just in the moment when you had this idea, when the spark of creativity hit you, did you feel positive? Did you feel negative? Did you feel relaxed? You can use the emotions, little buttons down there in the react button. You can click on it. I think there are a couple of them. So if you feel positive, then you can lift your thumb up. If you feel very sad in the emotions, you can do the crying. If you feel fearful, you can use the scream button, and if you felt in love, you can make the love button. So I'm looking at the screen now, and I see lots of thumbs up. Many people feel very positive when they are innovative. 1, 2, 3 people also felt a bit of fear, some negative emotions, but most of you felt positive. Good. Yes, that is what most people say. Positive emotions are linked to innovativeness and creative thinking. Companies are very interested in that, because if you want to be at the leading edge in an innovative company, you need to have innovative people. So positive emotions could lead to more innovative output, and that's not big news. Companies like Facebook, here you see their famous pasta party at the headquarters in Menlo Park in California. At Facebook, They try to create an atmosphere of positive emotions. Why? Because they want that their employees feel well and that they feel innovative in the one sense. Here I had the chance to visit the Google Europe office in Dublin, and here's a picture of their environment. Looks very much different from my cubicle in my New York Manhattan office. It looks very colorful and very nice environment. Why is Google investing in that? Well, again, they want to create an emotional climate or an atmosphere of positive emotions, because they believe positive emotions are linked to innovative behavior. And Google and Facebook are an industry field which very much depend on innovativeness. Quick and great ideas creation. Yeah, I was also interested in that, and I looked into the literature. And here's an article that I found from one of the leading scholars, Teresa Amabile from Harvard University. She has written a while ago quite some research and collected some academic evidence on which emotions make us creative. If you read the yellow line here that are highlighted, the results of her study indicate that positive affect, meaning positive emotions, relates positively to creativity in organizations, and that the relationship is a simple linear one. In other words, the more positive emotions, more positive effect, the more creativity in an organization. That's a linear positive relationship. So not only practice has figured it out, but also research says more positive emotions are great for your innovativeness. But that made me think, is it really true that only positive emotions make us creative? I thought. I know a couple of very creative people who had not the best and most positive life experience. Maybe you know this painter here, Edvard Munch from Norway. He painted The Scream, and if you know a bit about his biography, he was not the most happiest chap in his town, had a really awful life, and yet he was very creative in his paintings. Vincent van Gogh, certainly you've heard of him, very creative in his painting, leading in his innovativeness, how to create something new, fantastic paintings. He also was not very lucky. He didn't sell a lot of paintings. He even had a hard time with his family, except his brother. I think he bought one painting from him. He even cut his one ear. So his life was not only joy and happiness. Others, poets, here I took, for example, Franz Kafka, also not the happiest person. And you see here a great and poet, Goethe, who wrote about Dr. Faustus, a novel that deals with a lot of guilt, that what he has done towards a young woman. And he also, his entire life was coined by guilt and shame. So not positive emotions. Or think of musicians. Here I take, for example, Kurt Cobain, the grunge movement from Seattle. Very negative emotions that he transmit in his music. Yet his style, the grunge movement, was very innovative itself. So you see that some people are highly creative, even though, or maybe because, of negative emotionality. So real life tells us this, but companies and research tells us a different story. I found this fascinating. For that, I want to look deeper into this topic because, well, I'm doing research as in emotions, as I said, and I wanted to learn and understand it better. And more recently, a lot of the movement in research has moved away from this stream of positive psychology of the couple of last years, where very much through American authors have pushed forward that only positive emotions are beneficial, and we should avoid have any negative feelings. I, however, and many others of the research community, question this view. It was primarily coined by Martin Seligman and others, who very much put the focus on positive emotions and their effects. To me and my colleagues, some of my colleagues, we think emotions are much more than positive and negative emotions. I believe emotions are purely signals. Signals that tell you something. They give you guidance through your life. Meaning, if you feel a negative emotion, you might think, well, the negative emotion is a signal of my body or of my brain to tell me something is not right and I need to change something in my life. Because if I continue like this, I feel awful. So I would say that emotions, if you take emotions as just a signal, without saying, well, this is positive, I should pursue it, and negative, I just should avoid it, I think you should clearly listen to your emotions because they have to tell you something. So what does emotionality have to do with creativity? Well, I looked a bit deeper into this more recent research, and what has been found is, for example, that highest creativity is present when positive but also negative moods are present. So meaning not only this positivity, but also negative moods can be relevant. Then there's other research who shows that joy can lead to entrepreneurial innovation, but also anger. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Because if you had like a very customer experience that make you angry, from that, you could draw new ideas and say, hey, how can I do it and make it better? It made me so angry, maybe I need to change something. And this would be a good example how a negative emotion, anger, leads to new entrepreneurial innovations, to change something. For that, like a negative emotion could be very beneficial for you. Then there's research by my colleague Bledo. He has recently joined EDHEC. He's also an EDHEC professor right now. And he has also written about shifts in emotionality, meaning effective shifts between negative and positive emotions can lead to more creativity and innovativeness. For example, well, I like coffee. And in the morning when I wake up and I don't get a coffee, I'm really negative. I hate it. But then I go to the metro in Paris and somebody smiles at me in the metro. Yeah, it doesn't happen too often, but when it happens, it makes me create some positive emotions. I come to the office, I see all the work I have to do. So negative feelings. But then a colleague offers me a coffee for free. It pushes my emotionality into positive. That would be a good day in terms of innovativeness, because I have these shifts between positive, negative, and especially from negative to positive has been shown to push my innovativeness. And last but not least, other researchers have said it's not that important if it's positive or negative in the experience. It depends on the level of arousal the emotion can create. Some positive emotions can lead to a high level of arousal. For example, excitement. If you're really excited about something, you really want to try out new things about that. So the arousal level is high, which can lead to higher creativity. However, if you're like feeling very relaxed and even a bit lazy in the morning, you lie in bed, you don't do anything, that usually feels very nice for you, but doesn't have a high level of arousal and is usually shown not to be linked to too much creativity. If you think on the negative side, some emotions like anger or like feeling like really angry has a high level of arousal, and that is good for your creativity. However, if you're very depressed and pulled down, that leads to a lower level of arousal, and this emotion does not help your creativity. So according to this research, it is not that much it's positive or negative, it just needs to create some arousal in you that it makes you more innovative. So this is what we know from in a nutshell about negative emotions and innovativeness. As a next step, I looked into a set of emotions that is particularly interesting to me. I am interested in higher order emotions. Maybe you've seen the Pixar movie Inside Out. Inside Out deals with research by a researcher who looked into basic emotions. Basic emotions are happiness, anger, disgust. So we have a couple of very basic emotions that we have immediately when we come to the world. As small babies, we have basic emotionality. The baby feels happy, will smile at you, and when it's angry, you will hear it immediately. These are basic emotions that we have. They are biologically based in us, and when we come to the world, they are there. There are other emotions, higher order emotions, that develop later in our development. Usually, like emotions that are higher order could be pride, embarrassment, shame, or guilt. These are emotions that very babies usually don't have. We need to have an idea of ourselves in comparison to others that we can develop an emotion of pride, for example, because we compare us with others. So we need to have an understanding of ourselves. And that usually happens with babies around, young children develop a sense of, in the age of 2 or 3 years around, you get understanding who you are. Very young babies don't have that. When you put them in front of a mirror and they crawl to the mirror and touch the mirror because they think it's another baby in the mirror. At some stage of their human development, they have a sense of self and they understand that the other baby in the mirror is themselves. Also, some animals have it, by the way. There's research with some chimpanzees and some monkeys and gorillas, and some species have a sense of self and others don't have it. Sometimes also dogs have it. Some dogs bark as a mirror because they think that it's another dog, so they don't have a sense of self. But when a dog realizes that it's himself, or a monkey, what they did, they put a red dot on the forehead of the monkey, and when the monkey touched the mirror to touch the red dot, then they didn't have a sense of self. When they touched themselves, understanding that it's a mirror of themselves, then they could deduct that they have a sense of self. So I'm getting away from the topic, but here back to the topic of higher emotions. So higher emotions are very much later in our lifetime development, and they are also culturally influenced. Shame and guilt are 2 examples of that. We know that culturally, people in Europe versus people in Asia have different approaches to guilt and shame. The concept of shame is very dominant in Asian countries, especially in Japan or in South Korea. Shame is losing your face, while guilt is a bit different. There's a difference between guilt and shame. So Eastern Asian cultures are usually connected more with a tendency towards shame, and Europeans and especially Americans are more guilt-prone cultures. But what is exactly the difference between guilt and shame? Well, let me quickly explain that to you. Guilt and shame happen quite often in the workplace. They are very, very prominent. When something goes wrong, people emotionally react. When they try out something and something fails, as in any innovation process. When you experiment, it rarely ever happens in the first way. But people react emotionally to this failure, to their personal failure. Some people feel ashamed and some people feel guilty for that. What is the difference? Well, let me explain you. I have a glass of red wine here, as living in France, you usually need to have your red wine around lunchtime. So I have a glass of red wine. I spill it over my colleague's pants. In this moment, I do a mistake, a typical wrongdoing. So there are two ways how I could react. I could feel ashamed of my wrongdoing. Oh, I poured the red wine over the pants of my colleague. I feel so awful. I am such an awful person. I would like to hide under the table, sink into the floor, feel so small in this moment. This is awful. I want to avoid it. So this is a feeling of shame. I have a strong feeling that I am inferior. I push myself down. And my behavioral reactions is, well, I want to avoid the situation. I want to avoid my colleague. When he walks down the hallway, I change the hallway there and quickly hide in my office. Shame is withdrawal. Let's look at guilt. Guilt has an opposite reaction. Imagine same situation, I pour this red wine over the pants of my colleague. If I react with guilt, that is much more proactive. I put my focus rather on the inferiority of me. I put my focus on my behavior. Meaning, oh, this is awful. My behavior was wrong. I should do something about my behavior. And my behavioral reaction will be, I take a tissue or try to help him. Will say, oh, I apologize, dear colleague. I feel sorry. I'm very proactive. Let me get out my wallet. I give you 20 euros. Go and get it cleaned. And if it doesn't get out, I will buy you new pants. Very proactive. Shame is avoidance and pulling myself down. Guilt is I'm still okay because my behavior was wrong. Fabian, meaning me, is not pulled down. And guilt leads to proactivity, meaning changing behavior. And that, I thought, makes a big difference. If you feel ashamed or if you feel guilty. And some people tend towards shame and some people tend towards guilt. We know that, for example, body shaming is a typical phenomenon more likely be found in women than in men. Men usually, if they have a big belly, they don't feel guilty they don't feel ashamed of that. They're even proud of it. Hey, look at my big belly here. But not everyone, of course. But feeling ashamed of their body has been more found in women than in many men. So people sometimes react more with shame. Some people react more with guilt. That has to do with our socialization to a big part. Meaning, what's the cultural context, if you grew up in Asia, if you grew up in Europe, how your parents dealt with you, and so on. And what I wanted to find out is there a linkage how we react to personal failures and how innovative we are? Meaning, when we feel ashamed or when we feel guilty, does that change our innovativeness? Because again, shame is withdrawal and guilt is proactiveness. And indeed, when I looked at more than 500 employees in 4 different studies, and I looked how they reacted, some of them, just by nature, were just more shame-prone, having a slight tendency for the same situation of failure, being withdrawal, and some of them had a bit more guilt-proneness, meaning like reacting to the same situation of failure with guilt. What happened there is that I found in these 500 employees, statistically, that the people who are guilt-prone have a slightly more positive attitude to problems. So if there is a problem in an organization, people who had a tendency to feel guilt thought a problem is great because, well, there's a positive attitude because problem gives a challenge, and I like challenges. And shame people who tend to react to failure with withdrawal thought problems are something negative. And in the end, what I found out is that people who are shame-prone have this lesser tendency to be innovative than people who are guilt-prone. Guilt-prone people who react with proactiveness to failure know that they are not bad per se, but their behavior was bad and they can change something about it. While the shame-prone people, they withdraw from a failure. And as you know as everybody knows, when you try out something new, it will not work out the first time. Usually what happens is the first couple of times you will not be perfect. So the way how emotionally you react to that can make a difference. I did a second study with 150 professional actors. I looked for actors from TV and from theaters to work with me. And these 150 actors, what I did to them, I asked them to play a short little scene that represents either shame or guilt, or the placebo group, the control group, they did not have to play any emotions. So I randomly put these 150 people into one of these three groups, and they should play a very short scene. A very, very short scene of like a person showing another person's cell phone, and the other person takes a cell phone and lets it drop. And some actors, I asked them, so react with guilt towards this behavior. And some I said, react with shame. Why did I do it with actors? Because actors, professional actors, can create a certain emotions in them when the director says, "Lo, I need this to show you this emotion." So if you ask an actor to deep act, like to, for example, to be sad and cry, professional actors can do that. They can change their inner emotionality for certain emotions. And all actors that I asked them to play guilt, they immediately knew what guilt is and that it's different from shame. And they all knew that shame is something different from guilt. So I just had to explain what they needed to play. So some of them in the group of the shame group, they had to play the shame, meaning they made themselves small. They showed that they are feeling inferior. They tried to hide, something like that. A short scene of 2-3 minutes. The others, the guilt one, they should react more proactive. And the control group, these actors just should play a short scene where they talk about the weather without any emotionality. After this short scene, I asked everyone to do the same creativity exercise developed by some psychologists to measure their level of creativity in this exercise. What did I find out? Well, the control group on average scored on 2.8 in this creativity. So meaning just talking without emotionality, reacting without emotionality creates 2.8 level of creativity. Those that had to play a short moment of shame were less creative, significantly less creative afterwards. So just playing 2 minutes of being ashamed reduced their creativity. And now look at the guilt group. Their creativity was increased. Just playing this short emotionality of guilt pushed their creativity. Let me summarize. What can you learn for your leadership for that? Here comes what you should learn. This is little Fabian here. Fabian, that's me. Here, he just tried out one thing. He tried to be innovative, creative. He wanted to do something that he's never done before. He wanted to pour some milk into a glass. And what happens? Well, if you do it the very first time, doesn't work out. He spills the milk. Now his mother comes in. And you could also think of your employee making a mistake and your manager comes in. So in this case, the mother is kind of the manager. And what does the mother or the manager say? "Oh, Fabian, look at you, what you've done. You are so clumsy. You are just not talented. You are such a bad employee. You are a bad child. Go to the corner and feel ashamed." What happens with little Fabian? Little Fabian or your employee experiences inferiority, feeling small, in the corner, feeling ashamed. He runs up to the room, withdrawal behavior, puts a cover over his head, and withdraws from further experimentation. That, of course, in the long run, an organizational culture, a climate where managers show the inferiority of the employees by shame will lead to less creativity. Look at the same situation. Fabian spilled for the first time the milk. Now the mother comes in, or the manager comes in and says, well, Fabian, you should feel bad about it. Definitely, you should feel guilty for what you've done. Now what I want you to do is go in the kitchen, get a cloth and clean up the mess that you've done and try it right away again. In the sense-making of Fabian, the following happens. Fabian thinks, oh, I've done something wrong, strong emotions. But it's not me who is wrong, but my behavior. And my behavior I can change. I can clean up, I can try it again. I can feel guilty for that. And this guilt is very proactive. Feeling I apologize, I try to make up, and I try again in the future. And that supports kind of the idea when you create an organizational environment where people don't feel ashamed, but tend towards the related emotions of guilt, they will be more experimental and innovative in the long run. And that is what my studies and other studies have shown. And I think that is quite relevant for you if you are managing people and how you manage yourself, your own emotionality, that you kind of withdraw from this feeling of ashamed, but don't feel no emotion at all, because that's not the perfect way. Feel guilty for what you've done. Reflect on it, create that your employees or your team members react with emotionality, but an emotionally intelligent person steers it towards the guilt rather than to the shame. And that's the practical implication I wanted to share with you. And I'm eager to answer your questions or your discussions. If you have any further questions, I also have put them into a book, Advertising. Sorry, but that is my innovation management book that I have written, and it's published, available on Amazon and other websites. Thank you. I'm eager to look at your questions.
Thank you so much, Fabian. There's a couple of questions I've put in the chat, but I'm going to remind everybody that you can add your question in the question box on the bottom right of your screen.
Okay. Yes, Sandra speaks about, in her question, she asked that she has heard that people need to feel safe that they can fail. Absolutely. That is sometimes called psychological safety, meaning feeling safe. However, I think safe should be combined with emotionality, meaning you can feel safe and you feel, oh, I feel safe, I can do whatever I want, and I don't care about it. But if you feel safe and feel guilty for what you've done, then you have this urge to do something more about it, to restart it, to try it again. I think safe is it's like the baseline. You need to talk in a situation where people need to feel safe. From there, you can innovate. If they don't feel safe, I mean, if they feel like the boss will push them down when they make a mistake, then of course that will harm the innovativeness. So I think emotionality plays into it. You see some organizations where putting people ashamed is part of their climate. I think military. You don't want to have innovative soldiers in the moment. You want to have functioning, effective soldiers who avoid making mistakes. So you push them down, make them small. If you look at these military movies from the boot camp, what is it called? Full Metal Jacket, for example, where the drill instructor screams at soldiers, telling them how bad and awful they are. That's certainly not a safe environment to make mistakes. And that's certainly not an environment where innovativeness and creativity is highly fostered.
Thanks, Fabian. There's a question thanks for your question, Jana. And the question is, thank you for this interesting explanation. What do you think of differences between US and France in regards to shame and guilt?
Yes, As I said, higher order emotions are socialized, so clearly there are differences in different cultures. And definitely US culture is one that I would argue is very much guilt prone, meaning failure in the US is not something negative. Maybe entrepreneurs, to be successful, they need to have some failures on their resume, and that's something considered as positive. In France, what I've heard, I'm not French, but for example, I know it, I've heard it, that you are stigmatized when you had a failure. So that could be like you feel, well, inferior to a certain extent after a failure, and that is related to shame. I, for example, know that in Asia, like in South Korea and Japan, it's a very shame-prone culture. So I would say France is between kind of the US and, let's say, Japan, where losing your face is the worst thing that could happen to you. So, and in this situation, maybe people are not very likely to try out new things because they are afraid that they could make mistake, harm the team, and when they make a mistake, that comes back to them because they would lose their face. So that could happen. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I would argue that France is somewhere in between in the extremes. And again, it's not only national culture, it's also organizational culture, industry culture. Meaning in an accounting company, it works certainly different how to deal with failures than it is in a tech company where it's kind of Americanized startup scene culture where failures are totally okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the things that I was also wondering about, Fabian, as we wait for a couple more questions to come in, is what's the impact of this very ultra connected and highly distracting world that we're living in today? Is there I mean, it goes beyond, I guess, shame and guilt, but people lacking focus and being consistently, not necessarily 100% present in the moment. How does that play into emotions?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's saying difficult like across all industries. I mean, some industries foster very much this disruption and looking for constant change. But what I think with what the person who asked this question, I don't know who it was, but with a focus meaning looking into yourself and understanding your own emotionality, putting the focus outside of it and sometimes inside, that's a movement that's also sometimes referred to mindfulness. Mm-hmm. Understanding your own, that's nothing else as looking, hearing you, living in the moment, understanding how you react to certain environments. That has to do with emotionality, and that in the long run could also push you in a certain way. Was that the question correctly understood, or?
Yeah, I think so. It puts it clearly in the side of emotional intelligence then, yeah, rather than the innovation side. So that makes sense. There's a comment in the question box from Abdallah that you might want to have a read on if you have any comments about that.
Before applying an emotional intelligence approach to a situation, a person needs first to apply same on self-behavior and accountability. This might be the most difficult part. Continuous training might be the key for that. Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, the beauty of emotional intelligence and all these constructs that I mentioned, like psychological safety and mindfulness, these are skills. And skills is something that you can train, that you can learn, and that you can improve. There are other parts of us which are part in our personality, and changing the personality would be very, very difficult, if not almost impossible. That you try to, there are some parts of our personality that we can change. Other parts is very, very difficult to change. We know that from psychology. But developing emotional intelligence is a skill that has been clearly shown. Mindfulness and understanding and looking into yourself, everybody can do that, and everybody can improve in that. And that, I think, makes it useful to have a course on emotional intelligence and leadership with emotions, just as the one that I do in the MBA, because that is something that you can train, that you can improve. It is like a gym, you will not improve it with the first day you do it. It needs continuous improvement by training, but it's improved. Even if you're not the most talented person in emotionality, it's like if you're not talented for muscles, still going to the gym will have its benefits. And every doctor will tell you, go to the gym. And maybe you feel like already, oh, I'm so emotionally intelligent. Yes, that means that you have a talent for that. But even if you have a talent, you will not become in the gym the same. You will not become Arnold Schwarzenegger without training. So understanding your emotionality is something that you can train. Using your emotionality to influence people is something that you can train. It's a skill. It's not purely talent. It's not purely personality. It's something that I teach and my colleagues at EDHEC teach, and that is something that can be improved. So it's worth spending time on it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fabian. I think the time is nearly up, so it gives me just a little bit of time to close our session. These are the kinds of things that you go into during your Leading People in Organizations course and in some of your electives in the Global MBA. And if you're interested in refining your knowledge around these kinds of questions, then obviously coming into the Global MBA is one way to do that, and also gain a lot of important leadership skills in our Lead 360 program, which is part of the Global MBA. So without further ado, I want to thank everyone who sent in questions for your participation and for your reactions, and a warm thank you to you, Fabian, for being with us today and for sharing your research, your expertise, your knowledge, and your emotions with our group with our EDHEC Global MBA community. Thanks so much for being with us. For those online, you will receive automatically a link if you registered for this webinar to a recording which you can review or share. So please feel free to do that. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for logging in. You can always write me an email. My email is down there, fabian.bernhard@edhec.edu. If you have further questions or if you want further materials, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you.